No intro for me. We're going to go right to questions. I know you guys probably have a lot. So anyone want to start, I guess raise your hand and I will call on you if you want to post in the chat, that's fine too, but have at it. Any questions on the IEBC or IBC?
Alan, Joe Simmons. I have a question about what was mentioned about some equivalence with fire sprinklers and fire rated walls. Can you elaborate on what's going on there?
Equivalence to fire sprinklers and fire rated walls. Not quite sure which, I know, so there's a couple of things. We've removed the allowance to use the water curtains to get to a 50% increase on exterior walls. That was one that was in combination with both the IBC and IFC. And then I know there was a coordination. I think Denver's amendments, current amendments, were less restrictive than the national code when it came to certain fire rated assemblies. And so we moved that language from our current amendments in order to align with the requirements of the model code.
Okay, but we still can use the water curtain method for fire protection in the approved.
Well, you can't use it to increase openings any longer to 50%.
Okay.
So that's been removed.
Can we still use it proximate to stairs like a recent project we worked on?
I think that was not addressed in the amendments. I think that's a case-by-case scenario that you and I reviewed on that project together.
Okay, great.
So not specifically removed or addressed in the current round of amendments.
I see. Okay, great. Very good.
Okay. Anyone else? Our next person? I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there, so. Maybe not.
Yeah.
So we had those 5 topics, right? The mass timber, the we talked about, Joe and I just talked about the removing the less restrictive requirements in our current amendments, universal parking, distilleries, and then the group R3 and IBC. Ralph, it looks like you have a question. Ralph, you're on mute if you're talking, or maybe not. Maybe you're. Oh, now you're on mute, so maybe go back off.
I'll ask my question. The city and county of Denver has a proposal out there for CO2 limitations, and it excluded precast and concrete masonry units. Can you comment on that? Could anybody hear?
I can hear you. Can you repeat the first part of it? You mentioned CO2. Sorry, Ralph, the first part of your question cut out. So it's something to do with CO2, I thought.
I think he was asking about carbon requirements in CMU and precast, but I think those were code amendments that were proposed, but not necessarily approved.
Yeah,
adopted.
those were proposed, but we did the city and county of Denver did not approve those amendments.
Thank you.
Sure.
Here, I'll jump in here with 2 questions. One, can you define what universal parking is? Are we talking van accessibility for this type of parking, or is it just a additional accessible parking for electric vehicles?
Yeah, so it's going to have to be able to accommodate, basically its size is van accessible. So you're talking a 10-foot wide parking aisle and a 3-foot access aisle on each side. And so that is the requirement for a universal vehicle charging station. There was a back and forth on, the quantity of where there's going, of where, how many were required. I believe what's posted in the amendments currently on the draft is not current, but there was a comment in there from Eric Browning clarifying what the intent was of that amendment.
And does that carry the same fair housing guidance of overhead clearance requirements or allowance there not of as it relates to residential occupancy, particularly at garages?
Well, that's a good question. The assumption would be yes, it would require that it would have to meet those requirements for van accessible, although when I was reviewing it, the amendments, the energy code amendments, where the quantities for residential spots are located, it appeared that there might be something in there that said that if the requirement for universal is to the installed spaces, and so in theory you could do all EV ready or EV capable, and you may be able to get out of the requirement. And so when I was digging into it a little bit, it's something that, I don't know if it's a loophole, but I think it may be something that understands some of the requirements for residential parking and garage height and whatnot.
Okay, and then the second question I had was related to, this might be more of the IFC question, but I heard something about required minimum rating for 2 hour, removing some language around 1 hour shafts.
Yeah, no, so that is in the IBC, and so we had some amendments in our current Denver amendments were less restrictive. It was only requiring a 1 hour requirement for those shafts for, I think, 5 stories or less. I think we removed those to align with what's required by the model code.
Okay, so that was removal of the Denver amendment to align with IBC.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Kathy Parker?
I've got a question on the EV parking spaces, but this may not be the breakout room for that. Do I need to go to the IECC?
In terms of quantity, yeah. So actual EV spaces and quantity requirements should go to the IECC. If you have a question on the universal spaces, I can definitely talk about that.
No, I'll ask it in the IECC. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. I think James Lenhart was next.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, hey, thinking about accessibility, does the new IBC reference a different version of the ICC A117.1?
It does reference the 2017, and I believe our code adopts that, and so we would use that for I think there's a question if this is the Title IX question. We would be applying the 2017.
2017.
Correct.
So that's the one, if I remember correctly, that's got the 67-inch turning radius circle rather than the 60, right?
That's correct.
For new construction, of
For
course.
new construction, correct.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thanks.
Okay. John.
Yep, thank you. John Weistman here. Hey, looking at section 430, there's a significant amount of text that's been added. It's regarding aircraft noise reduction for multi-unit dwellings and schools, and then additional information. Just noticing and looking at the text, there's a lot of text that's in parentheses. And in the mandatory language, use of parentheses always raises a question as to, is that mandatory text or advisory text or what? So it might be worthwhile rewriting or editing that section 430. And that's on a number of pages. If that's mandatory text in parentheses, to remove all the parentheses that are mandatory text. Just some suggestions.
No, it's a good point. I was looking at that massive section earlier today, and I agree with you. We need to make some clarifications on what is mandatory.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I will have to, at the 15-minute mark, kind of just restart for anyone that comes into the room, but for now, it looks like we don't have that many questions, which makes my life easy. Any questions on mass timber? And that was kind of a big thing that came up. And the especially for type 4B on the amount of exposed ceilings that can be utilized. We're probably not all into mass timber yet, but it's definitely taking root and starting to become more prevalent in Denver.
Alan, can you speak to those encapsulation requirements for type 4B?
Yeah, so type 4B, the big thing that we pulled forward from 2024 was for type 4B, ceilings were allowed to be exposed 100%. And so that was for that amendment, that was the big allowance. So, you know, to expose more of it, I think is really going to encourage designers to use type 4B. I think it's limited to 12 stories. The other thing that we've been talking about internally that which didn't make our amendments, but we would certainly entertain accepting it via an admin mod was the requirement to install floor protection. I think there was a proposal to only require that you can go up to 4 stories before floor protection was required. So that's something that did not make our amendments, but something that we definitely entertain approving.
About columns and walls.
For 4B, it still remained at 40% for walls for sure. Columns I'd have to check, but walls I think stayed at 40%. There was some language in it to clear up. I think it said equal to. We just clarified that it's like less than or equal to. Kathy, your hand is still up. I'm not sure if that's a stale hand or you have another question.
It's a stale hand. I don't know how to
Okay.
put it down.
That's okay. Just want to double check. You have another question.
Hey, Alan, can you talk about the timing again? That was not totally clear, but
For
it
the
seemed like the
transition?
city council was still talking about it. They haven't totally adopted it, or have they?
No, so we haven't actually presented yet to
Uh-huh.
city council. There was the original intent was to try to get everything approved by 11/1, which, as you know, that date has come and gone. There were some significant things we had to clarify with the energy code. Energy code's really becoming an important piece of our amendments, and so there was a delay. I believe this is going to city council in mid-December with the hope that everything gets approved by the middle of July. I'm sorry, the middle of January 2023. Yeah,
Okay.
not July. And then that would give everyone more time. And then you know, it's not quite 4 months. It's probably closer to 3.5 months, where it's our typical transition period where we could use either 2018 or 2021. And then all projects other than main or type approves, I think it's specific in there, would have to be submitted by no later than the end of day, April 30th, in order to use the 2018 IBC, 2019 DBCA. So that's kind of the timeline for it.
And I suppose there will be an announcement on the Denver Gov website.
Yeah, there are draft transition rules now that are on there that reflect that, but that'll get finalized as soon as we get our amendments approved. Okay, we're at the 15-minute mark. I'm kind of supposed to restart just to welcome anyone that has entered the room. No real presentation here. I just want to jump right into questions because I know typically we have a bunch of them. And so if you are new to the room, we've been talking about some of the amendments to the IBC and IEBC. Feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions. I'm here to hopefully answer them for you. Feel free also to post anything in the chat if you would like to do that also. John, again.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Alan, in section 1010.2.11, where door hardware release of electrically locked egress doors is amended by adding item 7, it says shear tight magnetic locks shall not be permitted. It's also added in 1010.2.12. Is there a reason why those are being proposed for not being permitted?
Yeah, so up until 2018, that had been in our formerly known Appendix Q that addressed access control. And when we attempted to take Appendix Q and move it back into the model code, that section was lost. And so there was some concern with internally about, why we previously prohibited them, and then would it be safe to allow them again? The danger is, I think, when those types of pieces of equipment misalign, it's possible that even in the event the power goes off and it's supposed to go into fail safe, that the door could still jam, and then you wouldn't be able to open the door or egress the space. So that's why that amendment was brought back, along with the there's one similar one for electric bolts.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. So there's a question in the chat regarding 4B. That's a good question. I don't know if oversizing would allow for greater exposure. I would think it's something we could consider, but I'd have to get a definitive answer internally from the team on that. But I will take that question down and make sure we get an answer to you, David.
Great. Thanks, Alan.
Yep. I have a separate chat going on with city staff, and I think everyone's in the energy code breakout room asking questions there. Yeah, it looks like they're actually going to be asking for more time, so. John, your hand's still up. I just want to make sure that you don't have a new question, or is that from before for this year type?
Oh, that's one of those stale hands. Sorry about
Okay.
that.
Yeah. No worries.
I was wondering why my arm was getting tired.
Yeah, the term stale hand I learned when I was on the technical committees this year, when we were doing our amendment adoption process. They kept bringing that up because people leave their hands up. So I like
I'm
it.
guilty.
I like the term.
I'm guilty.
I've done it many times too, so you're not alone. Yeah, there really wasn't all that much we changed in the IBC. We talked about those 5 things. There was actually, back to John's comment there on access control, there were a few things we brought back from Appendix Q that we inadvertently deleted. So a lot of those things made it back. But really, and there's a handful of structural amendments that I'm an architect, so I kind of pay less attention to those. So if you have questions on those, I'd have to table them and reach out to our subject matter expert on our team to get answers on. But those are, I think, more not as involved as some of the other ones that we ended up approving.
Alan, if you had to think of maybe one amendment that you think is going to really catch people by surprise, what would it be?
So the universal vehicle charging station one that we talked about earlier. This one that was presented by Councilman Hines, who is a person with a disability, and he really wanted to get equity for that community in regards to EV charging spaces. And so it's aggressive. The idea is to not necessarily require, or it's not to require a separate accessible EV space, but rather provide these universal spaces that are available to all. And I think you guys should go and look at Eric's notes on the draft amendments, because it is more aggressive than what was originally approved on that table. And I think it's definitely going to developers that are work with a lot of parking. It's definitely going to affect them, because you're gonna have to give up more real estate in order to accommodate these spaces. And so for me, that's the big one that really will catch people off guard.
Cool. Thanks for the input.
Yeah. I think amendments that really will catch people off guard are in the IECC. That went through hours and hours of discussion, and there's a push for electrification. So everyone I talk to that comes in and is like they're trying to get in under the 2019 DBCA, I tell them do everything you can, because I think the energy code is going to slow things down, possibly if we don't have the technology here to really accommodate this electrification. It doesn't. I think we'll get approved, but I think there's actually a moratorium until 2024 before this is all required, before electrification is required. So there's a little bit of time, but some of the other things in there are going to be challenging. And just from a design standpoint, we're pushing the ASHRAE for performance methods. So, but this is the IBC room, so I probably shouldn't be talking about the energy code stuff. I was just involved on that committee also, so I know that it's going to be very involved to get to compliance.
Yeah, well, I'll switch to that room next.
Okay.
Get in that.
I see some people that I've dealt with in the room, but it looks like our room is shrinking. I think we're down to maybe 23 people. So probably only have 5 minutes left. If anyone wants to throw any questions out there, or just have an open discussion, I guess with anything in general, that'd be great.
Yeah, I guess I'll throw out a question. Alan, this is Byron Zick with Davis Partnership Architects.
Hey, Byron.
Good to see you again.
Likewise.
I guess I'll throw out a question, random question. Is there going to be any formalization of requirements for cross corridor doors? As you know, that's that's oftentimes an admin mod discussion for levels with a higher occupancy due to assemblies, and was wondering if there's any amendments that pertain to that, or any talk of codifying any of that.
There aren't any amendments, or it didn't even come up for consideration on this last round. I definitely would encourage the discussion for the next adoption process, which will be probably going into starting this discussion at the end of next year. I think there's two camps on it. Some people say, sure, why not? Why couldn't you do that? And there's others, and some of them have been well entrenched here in the city for a long time, that are just really opposed to it. So I definitely would encourage you to try to propose that. I think you'll get some support on it, especially if you can, verify that it can get locked in order to really, define that dead end. I think part of the fear, like I said, from DFD is that, that those doors get propped open and that they don't really solve the dead end corridor. And then there's also, how far can you take it? Can you just keep adding doors to to limit the dead end, and this thing can be, you know, 150 feet long. And so I would encourage you to try to present it, you know, and try to get support from the community. And, you know, when the time comes, I find it helps to reach out to committee members even before you present it, just to kind of get their pulse into how they're going to vote for it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Looks like we just have a few minutes left. If anyone else has any other questions, otherwise can hang out here for a couple minutes and then we'll jump back out to the other room.
Thanks, Alan.
You're welcome. Great talking to everyone.
Hey, Alan, I had a question.
Yep. Go ahead, Raymond.
In chapter 11, you know, IBC generally, and I didn't see any amendments that would address communication features in multi-unit residential buildings as opposed to hotels where they are required. But we often include them in our multi-unit buildings anyway because of ADA requirements. And I was wondering if there's any consideration to, you know, kind of codify that into the building codes as well.
We haven't discussed it, but I would be in support of trying to get that codified. Same thing I was talking to Byron. It's something that we encourage all our constituents to propose it. We haven't had a discussion about it, but if you want to either post it in the chat or send me an email, but definitely would like to have a further discussion with staff here on how they feel about it. I'd be in support. I'd be in support of it.
Okay, yeah, I'll post something in the chat to summarize it. Thank you.
Yep. Looks like we just have a minute left. I'll put my email in the chat just in case anyone wants to email me additional questions. Looks like we're down to a 50-second count and they're going to close the room. So.
Thank you for your help, Alan.
Yeah. Thanks, Byron. Good talking to you again.
You too. See you around.
Yep. We'll see you.